began the show talking about what the future looks like. We've considered some of the most innovative ideas and approaches to address our most pressing problems. How can we talk about solutions without looking at why change is so difficult to achieve when it comes to race and racism? Must justice, equality, and freedom always be dreams deferred? We take you back to Boston for my conversation with Professor Ibram X. Kendi about the work of dismantling the existing systems of inequality. Dr. Kendi founded and directs the Boston University Center for Anti-Racist Research. That center, in partnership with the Boston Globe, recently launched The Emancipator, a multimedia platform that aims to change the national conversation on race. So let's begin with progress, because I'm sort of a nauseatingly optimistic person, but sometimes I struggle to see progress. Do you see progress in any of those big issues that are confronting us right now?
We have a governing majority of Americans who recognize that structural racism is a thing, it exists, it's harming this nation, and that governing majority has the power through us rebuilding really our democracy to hopefully eliminate racism once and for all. And in 2010, only about a third, for instance, or so of Americans were recognizing racism, as a serious problem. And it got as high as 3/4 of Americans during the summer of 2020. Now it's come down a little bit, but I see that as progress.
What caused that change? Obviously, the murder of George Floyd was a big part of it, but it feels to me that there's been a shift in that direction.
Researchers and pollsters commonly point to two words: Donald Trump. And I think he caused many Americans, particularly many white Americans, to overcome their denial. And I think his presence and the ways in which he engaged and supported racist policies, he expressed racist ideas. I just think, the surveys sort of point out that it was really his presidency that really radically shifted the perspectives on race for many Americans.
You're well known for a book that you wrote called How to Be an Anti-Racist. What's an anti-racist?
I think to be anti-racist is to first and foremost recognize that we're living in a society with racial disparities and inequities. And, Black people are more likely to be incarcerated and impoverished or to be expelled from school, let's say, than white people. Native people were more likely to die from COVID-19. Latinx people were more likely to be infected. And so to be anti-racist is to not see those people on the lower end of those disparities as the problem. It's to see policies and power as the cause of those inequities. And it's to challenge those policies and that power and to replace them with more equitable policies. So it's active. You can't just sit around and do nothing and expect this status quo of inequality to go away.
But you're talking about systems, and I think often individuals feel like, well, I'm just an individual. I can't individually have an impact on a big system like inequity in healthcare or inequity in education.
No, not as an individual, but you can organize with other individuals. You can look in your neighborhood, in your organization, in your company, at your university, and figure out who's organizing, who's coming together to challenge racist policies here, who is pushing different narratives that allow us to recognize that the racial groups are equal. And so how can I join with them?
The Center for Anti-Racist Research at Boston University is what you run, obviously. What's your overarching goal? I mean, is it to work yourself out of a job 20 years from now to be like, yep, we had a thing, but we've solved it, so I can step down and retire now?
I mean, that's pretty much it. And I think to work myself, out of a job, it's going to require a tremendous amount of research. We really have to be able to document the racial disparities in health, in education, and
why is that so?
Justice.
Why is the documentation so critical?
Because those disparities allow us to answer the next question. What are the causes of those? What are the policies and practices and structures and conditions that are causing these disparities? Because if we assume that the racial groups are equals, then if there's a disparity, it must be because of something structural. That data almost provides a window into the potential policies and practices, historic and current. But we also want to identify sort of evidence-based policies that have the capacity to reduce those disparities and inequities. So a local legislator or a local activist in Arizona who is serious about reducing or eliminating housing insecurity, they will know what they can advocate for based on evidence. And so I'm really talking about research, policy, narrative, and advocacy, which are the 4 pillars of our work.
It's kind of a crazy time around conversations around race. How do you navigate that when you are really sometimes at the center of it?
So I first try to not take the attacks on me personal.
They name you in them sometimes, but I appreciate that. But they name you.
And the reason for that is because, I can be anyone, right? It just so happened that sort of the book that I wrote, became prominent, which led to this conversation about being anti-racist. But I could have been anyone. Just as there's so many people today who are shifting the narrative, from the problem is people to the problem is power, in policy, who are being targeted and who are being targeted personally. And part of what's happening, Soledad, is there was a time when the way in which they would shut down these conversations would be to say that the problem are those Black people or those Latinx people. But Americans, in many ways, have become to recognize those as racist ideas. And so because of that, they're less likely to do that, and they're more likely to just go after the people who are directly fighting against structural racism and demonize them and discredit them. And I understand that and I recognize that.
Has there been a personal cost to you in all of this, would you say?
There has. And I try not to talk about the personal sort of costs. I think probably the most consistent personal cost for me is it's just been difficult for me to sleep. Like I've never had a difficulty sleeping, until this year. And so it's something that I've been sort of working on. I've also sort of seen how, people view me as political, in a particular type of way that's pejorative. And while a year ago we're coming close, now they're sort of staying further away when I'm the same person expressing the same scholarship, using some of the same sort of evidence. And of course, I've had all sorts of, death threats and have had to take precautions. But again, I try, and I've always tried to look past what's happening to me and focus on what's happening to the people. There are people suffering right now because of the types of policies we have, because of the certain people who are in positions of power. And they're suffering much more than I am. And the cost to them is much greater than the cost of what's been happening to me.
Dr. Kendi, so nice to talk to you. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.